available for manufacturers through the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Firms Federal Grant Program, featuring Mark Allen and Jack Dye. Thank you again for joining us today. This webinar is being recorded and will be available later today on the Chamber website. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar, so if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those as time allows at the end. So now I would like to introduce our speakers today. First, we'll start with Mark Allen. He is the Contract Project Manager for Mid-American Trade Adjustment Center. He's been working in small business his entire career. After graduating from the University of Kansas, Mark went to work as a commodities trader on the Chicago Board of Trade, where he served as a commodities trader for the lumber industry. He started his own brokerage at the age of 24 and grew it to include a chain of building material distribution centers, employing over 400 people with operations in 17 states. We also have Jack Dye, Vice President at Applied Strategies International. He is the Assistant Director of the Midwest TAAF office and Vice President of the nonprofit firm contracted to administer the grant, the states of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. He's been part of the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Firms grant program for over 13 years. He's worked with hundreds of companies to get qualified for the grant, develop a plan to spend the funding, and implement the projects for each client. Thank you both for your time today to share your expertise with our members, and I will turn it over to Mark.
Great. Thank you, Janelle. Appreciate your time, and everybody that's joined us today. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us learning about some opportunities that are available for funding from the U.S. Department of Commerce and the Economic Development Administration division of that organization. So we're going to divide this up into essentially two segments. I represent the Mid-America Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, goes by the acronym of TAAC, TAAC, and we represent Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas in the same way that the Midwest TAAC organization that Jack works for, Applied Strategies International, represents Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. So that's why we're teaming up today to cover things with that. So we're going to divide this into two segments. Jack's going to take the first segment and talk for a few minutes about what the qualification, there's several steps in the qualification process to get people eligible to join and get the funding in place. And then he'll hand it back to me, and I'll go through different kinds of projects and different types of industries that we're in that we can use and leverage different kinds of ways that we can find ways to spend the money. And by the way, I just would say that this, if I'd have known about this when I was in business, when the lumber industry has its ups and downs, and we were a manufacturer, we made millwork products as well as did lumber distribution. I would have used it because it's a crazy good program when you really get down to it. So with that said, I'm going to pass over to Jack, and Jack, take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and go through a couple slides so you have a little bit of visual as well. So if you have any questions, let us know. All right, let me share the screen. Here we go. All right, is everything up? Can you guys see that?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Interesting. Share. Boom. Is that better?
That's it. Yep, you got it.
Yep.
Let me start this up. All right, that good for you, everybody? All right.
Yes,
So
sir.
a quick introduction of the grant program. This is what the grant is. The grant's designed to help manufacturers increase their competitiveness for any U.S. manufacturer. If you're headquartered in a state that's not one of ours that I cover or Mark covers, there is somebody we can introduce you to get work with the grant program. So we work with wherever your company is headquartered at in the U.S. Purpose to provide technical assistance funding, help you out with your weaknesses and come up with some solutions. The goal is, like I said, to improve sales, employment, and your profits, and compete with import products, which everybody in America deals with import pressures. There's two different levels of the grant. There's a $30,000 cost sharing, where the company, you guys, would pay 25% of the costs, and we pay 75% of the costs. That breaks down to $22,500 our share versus $7,500 your share. There's $100,000 and $150,000 cost share, which basically is a 50-50 split up to a maximum of $150,000, where I'm going to pay dollar for dollar along the way for you. There's 4 basic rules of what you can use this funding for. First off, we can't reimburse for work done before my PO or our PO, the TAAC PO is issued. So if you did work today and we got you in the grant tomorrow, we wouldn't be able to cost share any work done until I issue my PO. We can pick up along the way, but that is a rule we have. You have to use an outside consultant, is rule number 2. Whereas if you're on payroll, I can't cost share work that you do. Even if you moonlight as a web developer, I can't cost share that project. It's got to be somebody not working for your firm. The 3rd rule, we can't cost share hard assets. That basically says if I walked into your office and I could kick it, I cannot cost share it. Software is generally considered not a hard asset. It's considered intellectual property, which means we can cost share that in some instances. And the last rule is we can't cost share the regular cost of doing business, your payroll, putting your stuff up on a billboard, or printing out a bunch of brochures. We can do all the work up to the advertising to get it ready to be displayed or shared with people, but we can't actually pay for the printing, the hard asset of things, or the actual billboard or advertising space. So those are 4 quick rules, and Mark is later going to go on about certain types of examples of what companies typically do with the grant program to give you an idea, to kind of get some juices rolling. But I'm going to go through, here's what to expect when you decide you want to go through the projects or go through the process to become qualified. So basically, the grant program has 3 phases. Phase 1 is a certification, what they call a petition. It's your application. We're going to gather some information about your grant program, about you to qualify for the grant program. Phase 2 is an assessment and a plan where we look at how you operate and then decide what areas you'd like to use the project funding in. And phase 3 is the fun part where we're spending money on your behest. So I'm going to go through those steps one by one real fast. Phase 1, the certification eligibility criteria. Very wordy way to say we want to find a way to get you qualified for the grant. We're looking for companies with a sales decrease of 5% or more and an employment decrease of 5% or more. An increase of imports. Imports are a factor. We can have decreasing imports. Imports have to be a factor into a partial reason for your sales decline. A very small part of your sales decline, but that's kind of one of the aspects of it. The time frame we look at, generally we start off with the last 12 months compared to the prior 12 months. So I could go and say, let me see your numbers for 12 months ending September of 2021 versus September of 2020. And then look and see monthly averages, see if we can qualify you. We can also do shorter time frames, as short as 6 months over 6 months. So 6 months ending September of 21 versus 6 months ending September of 20. If those numbers work, or 7, 8, 9 months, whatever, all up to 12 months, we can work with that. So the big takeaway here is if this is something at the end of the day you're interested in, I would ask you guys not to self-qualify or self-disqualify yourselves. I would ask you to say, hey, we're interested, let's look at the numbers. I've gotten companies qualified into grants that on the paper at a quick glance, hey, we're doing better last year than this year than we did last year, or we're not down that far. Let's look at the numbers and see if we can find a way to make it work. That's what they pay us to do. Mark and myself and others around the country, we gather your data, we put together your application, and we'll submit it on your behalf. So you don't have to worry about dotting I's and crossing T's in a certain way that some government bureaucrat official wants to see. That's what we get paid to take care of.
Yeah.
So let me back up real quick. So real quick, that application, I'll speak for Mark and myself, I'm sure pretty much everybody. That time frame, how long it takes to get that done, depends on how long it takes you to get us the information we need. We can go really fast. I've had people introduce themselves to me on Monday, and by the end of the week, their application's in Washington, D.C. It can also take months if it's slow. Once it's submitted to Washington, D.C., they have a period of time where they'll accept it, and then they'll review it, and they're going to certify you or deny you. Now, Mark and I, our offices have a policy that if it's not going to pass their mustard, we're not going to submit it. So you don't have to worry about it getting declined. So we won't take you to that next step if we don't feel that we're confident it's going to get approved. So that's step one to get, and that's the hard part. The hard part is just proving out the numbers, getting some documentation from you to prove out that these things, you've had a slight decline in sales and headcount, and that foreign imports are a small portion of your grant program. I mean, of your sales decline. Second step, once that's approved, once you get certified in the grant, now at that point, you're in the grant for 5 years. No matter what happens to your sales, no matter what happens to your headcount, you could literally triple in size overnight and you're in the grant for 5 years. We don't kick you out because you're doing better. Step two is required to kind of say, this is where we have to tell DC in specific areas how the company operates and what areas of weakness you have. It could be something like we have a aging ERP system. We need some help, assessing this and getting us back and going. We have new product development needs, and we don't have the engineering or internal R&D horsepower in-house. We need to outsource that. Or maybe you have a heck of a product right now and you just need to find a way to market it and sell it and bring in an outside vendor to do that. Those are all topics that we cover through the development of this plan. And the idea is to tell DC, here's how the company operates. These types of projects fit within the 4 rules I mentioned earlier as to how we're going to cost share this grant moving forward, to do cost share projects moving forward. And that once we put that all together, we write it, we put everything together, we get you to sign off on a letter saying that, yep, this is developed by these guys, we're in full agreement. We send that to Washington, DC, and they're going to approve it. Now, once that's done, we get to the very, very fun part, which is implementation. That's basically where we start spending money. As I said before, we have 5 years to utilize the cost sharing grant. Typically, we don't give, if you're the large 50-50 up to $150,000, our budgets are tight enough that we're not going to likely be able to throw out $75,000 in a quick project and get you in and get you out. It's designed to say, we're gonna give you some help every year along the way. And the way that the projects work, you're not going to go out and develop, let's say, we'll use a website as an example. Let's just say you have a $20,000 website or a website you need to redo and you get some quotes from people. We typically like to see 3 quotes from vendors to say, here's what we're going to do, here's the costs. We don't take the lowest cost, we take the best value for you. What we look at is we'll say, okay, so this website's $20,000, and let's just use the example that we're on the 50-50 cost sharing plan. I am going to pay $10,000 directly to the vendor, and you're going to pay $10,000 directly to the vendor. So basically, when this is all said and done, you can think of the TAA, the TAAF program, as a giant discount coupon at that point in time. What the process is we look at those quotes. With your assistance, we select the best vendor, where I'm not going to tell you who to use necessarily. We have rules on who we can and can't use. There's a list that we look up online that's a government list that says, hey, they ever defaulted on government contracts before? And if so, we can't do business with them. There are businesses on that list. Personally, myself, I have not come across any in my 13 and a half years for my companies. It could happen, but as long as they meet the simple qualifications, they're qualified to do the work, we're going to say, let's go ahead with them. Now, what would happen is you'd send the proposal, I would approve it. And then you would send a draft PO, and I would take the draft PO and I would create my purchase order. And in different offices, Mark's office is a little bit different because they're a university, but their university would implement a contract as well between you guys and the vendor. So once in my situation, I would issue my PO. Once Mark's organization issues their PO, the project can begin and cost sharing can start happening, where we would go through and we'd say, okay, you did about $10,000 of that website as the example project in December of 2021, send a $5,000 invoice to my office, and the vendor would send a $5,000 invoice to my office and then send you a $5,000 invoice. If you verify you've paid your portion, we pay them directly. So there's no tax consequences for us. You're not going to have to show by any way, shape, or form that you're receiving money from the government, because technically, legally, I am not allowed to give you $1. So that's kind of the way we go from qualifying all the way through to start spending money over that 5-year period. We don't require you. One thing I would like to point out, we don't require you. You're not signing a contract to move from start to finish. You can say, I'm interested, and you qualify, and you don't want to go forward. That's completely fine. I'm not a commissioned employee. I don't get a bump in my pay every single time I get somebody in. If you're not interested, it's not a hard sell. Great, good luck. If you have any questions, if you want to come back later, let's do this. You can get qualified and not do a project, not write the plan. Those are all, you can walk away at any time. You're not committing to spending anything on any particular projects. It just becomes available to you. So I'm gonna drop off for a second. I'm gonna let Mark talk about what types of projects, now that you know how to get qualified and what you can do with the grant funding, or what the process is to get the grant funding. Mark's gonna go through some typical projects that we cost share very frequently, and I'll let Mark go.
Sure, great. I appreciate it. So, yeah, there's some basic differences about who the hosts are for the Trade Adjustment Assistance Centers. So we are hosted by the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. So we don't issue a PO, we do a contract, a 3-party contract between your vendor, yourselves, and our organization. We sign off on them. And after you and your, so we issue, and we can do different kinds of contracts. You make the selection on who you want to use. You can get bids if you choose, or we can also do sole source contracting. So if you have someone that you specifically want to work with, or you've worked with before, and as Jack mentioned, they meet the criteria of the US government, then we can write the contract as a sole source contract as well. 3-party contract. And again, it's only issued after we can only spend money if you have not started the work, but you can start the work immediately upon us receiving back that signed contract from you and your vendor. So, and that where that comes in is really after the adjustment proposal is approved. The adjustment proposal essentially is a strategic plan on how you want to spend the money. So, and the government will want to know that, because Jack and I both write the strategic plan or the adjustment proposal and submit it to the government. We do all the work, all the submissions for you. The only thing you really need to do is to get us the information that we request on both the petition application, which is the request for assistance, and on the adjustment proposal, which is the approval for the assistance. And after you do that, then we take it. Now, the government requires that we charge a small fee, but it's only after you are approved to be certified, okay? So, or you're certified to spend the money. So it's a small fee that we are required to charge. And the largest fee would be $2,500 on that $150,000 amount. So it's reasonable relative to the return on investment for the time it takes for you guys to put the money into it to do that. So essentially, one of the things that we are required to do is when we do that strategic plan or that adjustment proposal is to ask you to cover different areas where you might be interested in spending the money. So I'm just going to take a second and go over the 4 basic areas that the government is going to ask you what kind of a bucket you want to create for each of the different kinds of projects you might want to do. Many people want to do just one project, and then so they want the money for, let's say, like Jack mentioned, ERP systems. Well, those are not cheap for a lot of people, and so they may be a $150,000 ERP project that you want to do, and you may want to write one contract or one PO in Jack's case, and spend that $75,000 of your money and $75,000 of the awarded money from the TAA funding assistance. So we can't call it a grant. We call it technical assistance funding. The government doesn't like the word grant. They think that's a giveaway project. And even though you're getting money here, that's a match kind of a thing. It's not. We don't call it a grant. We call it technical assistance funding. So the 4 basic areas are essentially for production type things, which is the inventory management, ISO certification, operational analysis, process engineering development, product development, designing and prototyping, as Jack was talking about, new products that you might have, quality improvements, productivity improvements. Many of you might be familiar with either the CIRRUS organization in Iowa or the IMEC organization in Illinois. Those are manufacturing extension partnerships. And if you're a manufacturer, you're probably familiar with the Lean and Black Belt, Six Sigma, and those kind of things that they can help you with as far as production improvements and quality improvements and those kind of things. So the first area is called production. And the second area is called marketing and sales. It goes to, Jack mentioned websites, website development, and that kind of stuff, e-commerce development, export or international trade assistance if you're considering exporting, Salesforce programs, marketing research. We can pay for booths at trade shows. We can't pay for your travel and your expenses while you're at a trade show, but we can pay for the booth and the collateral materials that go with that, the development of collateral materials. We can't pay for the actual printing of those kind of materials, but we can pay for that collateral development. And so those are areas where we can spend marketing dollars. And that'd be a big portion of a lot of that stuff is marketing dollars. In general, and I don't know what Jack would say, but marketing and sales would be pretty big of the four categories. It would be one of the bigger ones. The third area is general management or financial areas where we can talk about studying the organizational analysis, workforce development, training programs. Training is a big deal. We can do a lot of training programs for people, sales training, management training. We work on succession planning and that kind of stuff as well in the finance and general management area. And then the last area is called support systems. It's IT. We can do all kinds of things there. We can help you with your upgrades on a lot of this, the software part of it. Again, we can't buy you new hardware, but we can do a lot of the work around the software support systems that you might have in your organization. Upgrades, we can do upgrades to current systems. We can help you convert systems. We can enhance the existing systems, and we can do all the training that goes around that as well. So those are kind of the four cost buckets where we can spend money. Timing on this. So we're talking about the United States government here as far as the funding availability. So there's a process that goes to it. So let me just quickly explain that process. The first thing that we'll do is we'll do like a pre-qualification. As Jack said, our organization, his organization, we both are batting 1,000 on getting people approved. We're not going to submit somebody and you will not spend any money if you're not going to get approved. So there's a no cost, get ready to go kind of thing. So you won't spend any money at all until you're ready to go. And we want you qualified. So we're going to make sure that it's a pre-qualification process is really important. And after we submit then what's called the petition, which is that request to be certified for that for the funding, it takes a period of time. The EDA has just introduced a new computerized system, Salesforce, to be able to submit those, and they're kind of working through that stuff right now. But let me tell you how quick it works. I submitted a request for funding for a company, an Iowa-based company, on October 25th through using their process, the Salesforce process, and it was at the very initial stages of the thing, and they approved the thing in less than 3 weeks, which is record time as far as we've seen. They can take as long as, depending on their workload, they can take up to a few months to get that done. So, and that's the first step. The second step, when we submit the strategic plan, they're required to approve that within 40 days, or it automatically is approved. And that has it's never taken them 40 days to approve that for me anyway, but they'll get approved. So it's a pretty reasonable process relative to the way the US government operates. Now, another thing that I'm going to just quickly talk about is that in the infrastructure bill that was just passed by Congress and signed by President Biden the other day, there is additional funding that's going to be available. So the qualification process is going to be largely the same, but the funding could be double what it is. So there could be programs up to $300,000 available. So anybody that's on this right now, we can hang on to some dollars if you get approved under the $150,000 maximum, and then EDA imposes or puts in the work for the $300,000 amount. We'll have money available to spend more than $150,000 if that's what you need. Example, I'm working on a project right now for a client in Iowa where they're having a $195,000 upgrade on their ERP system. Well, we can't cover a bunch of that, but under a $300,000 deal, we could cover a big chunk of that kind of an expense. So it's something that's kind of cool that they put in place, and that comes as a result of you and businesses like yours speaking to Congress about the idea that, hey, we've got imports that are going to cause us problems and so forth. The way this funding is leveraged is based on import increases. So if you have any products or any even parts of products that are in your realm of what your organization manufactures or puts together, assembles, then those are the kind of things that we can leverage. Those, they're called HTS codes, which we'll work through all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get into that too much until we qualify it, but anyway, that's kind of a basic synopsis of where we cover. Industries, what kind of industries do we cover? For the most part, you have to be able to put things together. You're assembling or manufacturing initial products. So for example, manufacturers that do assembly or sub-assembly for the automotive industry, for the agricultural implement industry, for manufacturers, chemical manufacturers, people in those kind of areas, printers, actually printing companies. So for example, if you're in the printing business and you actually print, I got approval for a company that they only do construction documents. And so they actually manufacture and assemble specification books. Printers are a good place to get qualified. The retail business is very tough. If you're in the retail industry, it's very tough, unless you're in this kind of retail industry. A brewery, a distillery, a winery, which they sell retail product, but because they're an agricultural and they're a manufacturer, they can get covered. So that's an area where it's kind of cool. Pharmaceuticals is a big area where people can come. Agricultural and veterinary pharmaceuticals and agricultural chemicals are big areas where we can get assembled to or get people put through. So Jack, do you have other people that you can think of that are along those lines?
Yeah, the way I would describe it when I talk to companies who are potentially interested in it is, first off, as Mark mentioned, the government changes these program rules from here to there over the years. We used to be able to deal with service firms. The way we look at things, if you create something and or add value, that's something we want to have the conversation whether or not we can work with you or not. That's the number one thing. And then when you talk about the retail, the reason that's difficult is because we have to show that some of your customers purchased something from a foreign source, not you. So if you're a sandwich shop on the border of Minnesota and Canada, you might be able to say as people went over to Timmy Hortons in Canada versus coming to your shop. It'd be very difficult to get customer support for that, which is one of our qualification purposes. But if you have anybody if you're having somebody, foreign imports are coming into the country in your industry, that's something that we more than likely can work with. So that covers pretty much anyone who makes anything.
Cool. Hey, Janelle, we're ready to hand it back to you. Are there any questions that people have?
Okay, well, thanks so much. Again, if you guys have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I just have a couple of questions to get us started, and then we'll see if any more roll in. So size of companies. So if we've got companies on the line that have 300 employees or 500, are there any limits to who can participate in this program?
No, I will say in my experience, the largest firm I've ever worked with had thousands of employees and were over $1 billion in annual sales. And the smallest company I worked with had about $100,000 in annual sales. And so if you fit somewhere in that, if you're $1 billion firm or down to a mom and pop shop,
Sure.
You will fit in there some which way. And along those lines, I do want to say one quick thing. The level of funding is kind of dictated by what you can and can't use. There's definitely a benefit to having us pay for 75% of the cost share of projects. But if you have a ton of projects, the additional money is something better to go the 50-50. I'm not necessarily going to decide that for you. That's going to come out of the conversation on what you guys are going to do with the funding.
That's right. Stephanie, I see Stephanie has asked a question. Is there a pre-application worksheet? And the answer to that is yes. So we send a simple two-part spreadsheet, one that covers sales, one that covers employment. And we'll even customize it to the months that you want to use. So for example, like Jack's example was up to September 2020. That would mean we would want to qualify you based on October 1st to September 30 of each year. That would be the qualification process. We can't go back too far because the government wants pretty current information. So if your decline, if that 5% decline occurred more than 4 or 5 months ago, you're not going to probably be eligible immediately. Now, I will tell you what can happen, and I've got this going on right now with a company in Iowa. They've had crap business over the last 9 or 10 months, but they had one big month in December of 2020. Okay, I mean a big month, like triple their normal numbers. So, and that was a way out of the deal box, one sale, one time, but it would not qualify them for the funding based on the way it is right now. So but we can wait until the end of December of this year when they move from the current status into last year's business, if that makes sense. So we will wait, and then we'll go January 1 to December 31 for them, if that makes sense. But Stephanie, to answer your question, yes, we have spreadsheets and we can issue those. Easy enough, easy peasy.
All right, thank you. Another question that I have is, you guys mentioned imports. How do I know if imports are related to my business, are increasing or decreasing?
Talk to us.
Yeah. So the best way to look at it is, first off, every industry has imports affecting you, whether you know it or not. A lot of people I've talked to recently are like, oh no, our business is not down due to imports, it's due to COVID, or it's due to, supply chain issues and market issues in general. Now, all of that's probably very true, and you're not wrong, but we don't have to prove that imports are the overriding factor. We have prove imports are partially responsible for your 5% sales decline. The technical way, without getting too wordy, what we do is we take, let's say we qualify you on a year-over-year, and that number of sales decline is $100,000. I need customer support to say some customers that have declined in sales of about $5,000, at least a couple bucks of that was foreign imports.
Yeah.
Not that $5,000 was done by foreign imports that hurt your business directly. That's partially a part of that $5,000. So the bar is set really low on that number. And the way we look at it is we look at HTS codes and see what imports are increasing or decreasing in the country. But in every category, there are imports. So pretty much if you make something, you have import pressures, whether or not it's an easy slam dunk, or if it's something simple or something more difficult, we have to dig into a little bit. Well, that's something that Mark is well trained in doing. I'm well trained in doing. We have a lot of.
Absolutely right. We're here to. That's our job. That's part of our job to find those kind of things. So we'll just talk to us about it, and we can figure it out for sure. Again, we're 1,000%. So we're neither one of us ever had a thing decline. So
perfect. Talk to me about like the timeline. You mentioned, some of the deadlines between the different phases. Starting tomorrow, what do you anticipate ballpark timeline to get money in hand if people are able to work through the program quickly?
So the way the timeline works, and our hands are tied a little bit because we submit things and send it to Washington, D.C. So I always tell you, here's the official time frame, and it can be faster. So if I submit your application or petition into Washington, D.C. today, once they accept it, they have 40 days to say yes or no to it. And the difference is they can take a little time to accept it, but generally they're going through that information, making sure they have no questions. If they have a question, they're not sure about something. And remember, they're not industry experts. They're good at doing the bureaucratic paperwork. So they may or may not understand exactly what we're putting forth. They may have a couple additional questions. So that process, it takes about, say, 40 days or so from the day of submission. So a month and a half is kind of the outside. And then when we sit down and we develop the business proposal, it takes a little bit of time for us to write it and send it, put it all together, make sure it's all put together. Then we submit that. They have 60 days to say yes or no. Typically, you're looking at 3 to 4 months, and I can't promise anything, but it generally goes a little quicker. It can go slower. There's times where the EDA is working on expanding the grant program or redoing contracts for all of us and getting our funding ready for us, that they're delayed by a little while. So there are hiccups in the grant program, but typically you're looking at a few months. So if you're looking at doing a project December 1st, you're probably going to need to go it alone, honestly. However, by us being the way the grant works, we have so many different areas we can cost share projects in. even if it's something that technically would fit in our grant program, our assistance, we could use the money somewhere else to help offset those costs for you down the road.
That's right. That's right. Just to give you an example on that timeline thing. So we had a Davenport, Iowa-based manufacturer that we submitted their petition application. That's the request for certification on August 25th. And on October 25th, they were approved for that. We had already given them, so we sent out a questionnaire on how do you want to spend your money and what kind of strategic plan you'd have. And I'd already sent that out, and so I had it back. So we submitted their adjustment proposal. Let's see, what is today? Last week. We submitted it last week. So we had about a little less than 2-week turnaround from approval of their certification to application for the spending money. And I think we'll probably, because the way they're working right now, pretty smooth, we'll have that well before the end of the year.
Great. Awesome.
But that's not a promise. Hang on. It's U.S.
That's there. Okay.
promises.
Understood. Just making sure that people understand that it's not a 3-week turnaround. There's a
Right.
process to it. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So want to thank you guys so much for presenting your valuable information for your businesses. Thank you, Mark and Jack. As Jack said, don't self-qualify or disqualify. Make sure if you're interested, you contact the correct person for your state to see if you can qualify for this program, because it's a great program, a great value add. Again, this webinar is going to, sorry, go ahead.
A quick statement. So you'll be able to share our contact information with anybody that wants more information.
Perfect.
Okay.
So if you're interested, we will get the contact information out to the folks that are on the webinar today, and they will be in contact with you. So again, this webinar is going to be recorded and available on our website, quadcitieschamber.com. Thank you again all for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.